वीरेंद्र सहवाग आज काफी निराश होंगे क्योंकि अपने होम ग्राउंड एक बार फिर से नहीं चल पाए।
In the taste. Kitchens of India fruit and spice conserves. A twist in the taste.
This is Face the Nation, broadcasting live from the CNN IBN headquarters in New Delhi with Rajdeep Sardesai.
Hello and welcome to Face the Nation, the show that asks you the big question of the day, looks for an answer from you, the viewer. I'm Rajdeep Sardesai. On the show tonight, the results of the Rajya Sabha elections have been announced, and this time two businessmen have managed to get entry to the upper house. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, the former CEO of BPL Mobile, has been elected to the Rajya Sabha from Karnataka. He was backed by the BJP and the JDS. Delhi-based businessman Sudhanshu Mittal, however, could not make it to the upper house from Uttar Pradesh. Later in the show, we'll be looking at the businessman factor in India's upper house. But our main focus tonight, well, with a clear aim to improve the public health.
With reports of unethical practices, including commissions given in return for referral and diagnostic work, we must have appropriate measures to tackle these maladies.
Well, with a clear aim to improve the country's public health system, Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh today launched the Public Health Foundation of India. The 25-member body has Nobel laureate Amartya Sen on its board. The PHA-5 will advise the government and its public health institutions. State expenditure on public health in India is just 0.9% of the GDP. So how will this new foundation help in improving public health in India? We have a special interview with PHA-5 members, including Dr. Amartya Sen, in just a moment. Our question of the day tonight: has public health lost out in the reforms agenda? Type QOTD, give a space Y for yes, or QOTD, give a space N for no. SMS us to 2622. You can also vote online on IBNlive.com. Before we begin, here's a quick look at some of the other stories that have been making the headlines tonight. India won the one-dayer at the Firozshah Kotla in New Delhi today, chasing a target of 204. England could manage only 164. Andrew Flintoff and Kevin Peterson went in quick succession after a 60-run partnership. Irfan Pathan provided the early breakthrough, but Harbhajan Singh was the man of the match, taking 5 big wickets. Congress President Sonia Gandhi started her virtual re-election campaign in Rai Bareli. She said the controversy over her being chairperson of the National Advisory Council was unnecessary. She said the real face of the opposition had been exposed after her resignation, as everyone was now trying to save themselves from disqualification. India has its first conviction of a doctor under the law banning prenatal tests. A court in Faridabad sentenced Dr. Anil Samania and his compounder to 2 years imprisonment with a fine of 55,000 rupees. His ultrasound clinic was raided on the 11th of October 2001. Well, it's time now for our top story on Face the Nation. Some strong medicine from Dr. Manmohan Singh today, as he gave a diagnosis on the state of the nation's healthcare system. He said this at the launch of the Public Health Foundation of India, a body that will advise the government on how to improve the public healthcare system. CNN IBN Soni Sangwan now reports.
Perhaps the most sacred of relationships, and also one that's most abused. But the PM's message is clear. The healers themselves are in need of some urgent healing.
We are all familiar with reports of unethical practices, including commissions given in return for referral and diagnostic work. We must have appropriate measures to tackle these maladies.
The launch of the Public Health Foundation of India was perhaps the ideal place for the Prime Minister to spark off a debate on the state of healthcare in the country by raising concerns over the unethical medical practices that have crept into the system.
And his isn't the only voice of concern. India's best-known social scientist agrees with him.
The patient has no clue what ailment he has and what would cure. In that situation, to rely on private healthcare without a basic public healthcare to fall back on is really to invite the combination of quackery and crookery that we see today.
And that's why there's a need for the Public Health Foundation of India, an initiative that plans to set up 5 centers to initially train up to 10,000 public health professionals. And that's quite a number, as there are only 43 doctors for every 10,000 people. Compare that to the US, almost 2,500 for the same number. If doctors are short in number in India, then public health professionals are even fewer. For now, the initiative has been pledged almost 155 crore rupees by various private donors.
Programs for the poor will degenerate into poor programs if these deficiencies are not corrected in time.
Deficiencies in India's public health system not only have to be met, but also be seen to be met. And this private initiative with government backing could actually go a long way in helping the UPA fulfill its NCMP promises. In New Delhi, Soni Sangwan.
Well, earlier today, I spoke to Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, Rajat Gupta, senior partner worldwide of McKinsey, and D. Srinath Reddy, professor of cardiology at AIIMS. They're all members of the newly formed Public Health Foundation of India. Here's this special interview on the contentious issue of public health in the country. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on CNN IBN. Dr. Sen, let me come to you first. For years you've spoken about the need for greater investment in public health and education. Now, budget allocation for public health remains at 0.9% in this country. Are you seeing a change in mindsets when it comes to issues of public health?
I think there's some change, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. I mean, I think in education there had been more of a response. And some of the budgeting for such issues as school meals, which are, I don't think with figures under the health budget, are positive development for health as well. But as you point out, that number is really shocking. And there's a long way to go.
Is there a mindset problem? Is that in the mind, you think?
I think there is. I think there are two issues here. One is the mindset issue, which is, changing, certainly. And I think I was impressed by the fact when the present government was elected, Manmohan, right from the beginning made a statement about the importance of education and healthcare, which is somewhat different from the main priority that he showed when he came in as finance minister in the early 90s. But I think there is that, but there's some movement on that. But there's the other side, very importantly also, I think we have to, there is a recognition, which is in fact correct, that there are many other issues in the delivery of education and healthcare, including the incentive problem of people, even the existing resources are translated into school teachers and public healthcare officials who are often, at least according to our survey of the Pratishi Trust, quite often not there, and there's a real organizational issue to be dealt with. Now that requires a simultaneous addressing of the organizational and the financial problem, rather than regarding the organizational issue as a reason for not doing the financial change.
Okay, organizational and financial problems then. Mr. Gupta, how will this foundation actually fill in that gap in the public health systems of the country? What is this foundation going to do to actually fill that gap, organizational and financial weaknesses that exist in our public health system?
Well, first, the foundation has 3 main objectives. First is to be a real think tank on public health issues, all of these issues we are raising, and do research on them and impact public policy on them. The second is to set standards of public health education. Today, there are people practicing public health who are not qualified and haven't been trained to do so. Many may be medical doctors, but don't have public health education. So we want to set standards for that. The third is actually to set up a series of institutes that will actually create the manpower, the human resources, and train them in public health.
Have you set a target that over the next 5 years we'd like to create so many public health professionals in this country who work in the public health sector?
Yes, we have. We believe we'll be training 10,000 plus public health professionals when the network of schools, which is 5 we are thinking of right now, gets going. We have plans to do 2 in the next 2 years and then probably 5 in the next 5 years. We want, this is again a mindset change. We want to create a profession that is public health and create that career paths within both government and in private sector so that this becomes truly a respected profession and attracts the kind of professionals that we need.
But Dr. Reddy, how are public health professionals different to what we have at the moment? We've had some successes in this country, like the Pulse Polio campaign. So how will these public health professionals really be different?
Currently, the people who are engaging in public health functions are mainly medical doctors without any broad-based training in public health. Doctors are primarily trained to diagnose disordered biology in individual patients and to provide good clinical care for them. But in terms of the social determinants of health and disease, which actually at the population level create the conditions for disease or foster health, the doctors during their medical training do not have adequate exposure.
But Dr. Sen, a private-public partnership in the health sector, in India there is skepticism, given the fact that it's believed that the private sector will never really shoulder the burden of non-profit, mass-based medical sector. Do you believe that also will change, that private-public partnership can work in the medical sector, in public health in particular?
Public-private partnership has taken so much kind of confused thinking in the past that it's not easy to disentangle it from a structure which actually functions, in the sense that the private sector does come out and give the money and the public sector feels not threatened by it and so on. I think one of the problems that we face, which is to look at, you raised the question at the beginning of 0.9%. I mean, one of the reasons why public health expenditure is so low in India is that India has moved more than any other country I know at this stage of development towards the delivery of basic health care through the private sector. And I think that's deeply exploitative because of the fact that when a patient does not know what is it that he or she is suffering from and what the ailments are, it's absolutely straightforward ground for exploitation.
Yes, Rajya,
Can I just add one thing? If you look at the larger societal problems, and certainly public health in this country is one of the biggest problems, there's increasing evidence that actually you've got to involve government, civil society, and private sector to solve these problems. There is very little, only one sector can by itself do. We've tried this one, the government does its program, civil society does its own thing, and business is trying to do its own. It does not work of problems of such scale. So this is a real experiment in saying, can we get all these three sectors to collaborate in a model that brings all their respective strengths to bear and develop a successful, initiative that will transform the state of health in this country.
Is that ambitious? Are you being ambitious in that sense? Is this, given the fact that you probably have to deal with the same bureaucrats, the same system, are you being ambitious when you believe that mindsets will change?
Well, the foundation hopes to play a catalytic role. Firstly, by infusing public health expertise into a system which is currently underperforming, we wish to see that the programs that are currently designed will perform much better and yield better results. But even at the level of policy design, we believe that exposure to public health training will enable even the bureaucrats fashioning these policies to be much more responsive to the needs of public health and integrate those critical elements in their policy design and delivery.
Dr. Sen, there will be the questions that will be raised as to whether India in itself, whether projects like this will actually trickle down, whether the people who need it most, who need the benefit of public health most, will actually get it. That's the real key question.
I agree, that is the key question. But, I think the problem of trickle down isn't the serious one here. There are serious problems. The trickle down happens when you are addressing economic growth generally. And the question is whether it will trickle down to the poor. A good example is China. Its high expansion of healthcare and longevity occurred before the economic growth, that is pre-reform. That was the period when life expectancy went from 38 years to 68 years. Since then, it slowly moved to 71 in a span of 25, 26 years. Very slow growth. So one could say that the trickle-down effect there had been relatively small, particularly since basic social insurance of health was abolished in 79. Trickle-down became important. But in this context, what's being discussed is not a question of something else happening elsewhere and it's trickling down, but the focus of the foundation and the public health training, the officials being trained, is precisely to deliver health directly. So there's not a question of trickling down. That is the primary object of the exercise.
So what I can see, Mr. Gupta, the primary objective is to create this cadre of public health professionals committed to public health with a clear career graph, who thereby are able to work on research, policy,
and delivery programs and design of programs, architecting of programs, delivery of programs. One thing I want to make is that scale at which we are thinking is very large. I mean, today we are maybe, graduating 300, 400, in the hundreds in terms of public health professionals. We're talking about 10,000.
My final word then from you, Dr. Sen. Give us a futuristic view. We live with a president who looks at India 2020. 2020, do you see public health really becoming central to policy making?
Yeah, I don't think, Mr. Sardesai, I don't think we should see it as a case of prognostication of what will happen, what is my best guess. I think the question is what change can we bring about. I think it's an issue of agency and change. And from that point of view, they're both much more involved in it than I am. But as someone coming in from the academia, but very involved, as you know, with policies here over the last 40, 50 years, I'm concerned to what extent the problems that are being faced will be rightly diagnosed. Public health care here will raise very different kind of issues compared with what public health faculty, for example, at Harvard would be typically offering. So the question is whether with clarity we can have the diagnosis and then proceed to deal with those problems appropriately. My hope is that it will be able to do it. At least that's that at the moment is certainly the resolve. And I don't see, given the level of commitment that I've seen on the part of the people who are involved, why it should not really translate. But it would not be just a prognostication. If we just leave it and say, well, by 2010 we will be, or 2020 we'll be fine, I think nothing will happen. I think it's a question of to what extent we can take the future of India in our hands.
Sure. Well, it is a step forward, and I think you have, in your own way, looked into the future, and more strength to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Amartya Sen there talking to CNN IBN. Well, let's have a look at the poll figures, whether they've changed in any way after you've heard what Dr. Sen had to say. Well, 90% of you are saying, has public health lost out in the reforms agenda? You're saying, yes, it has. That's 9 out of every 10 persons. That is a formidable majority, and that's perhaps what expresses Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's skepticism today when he addressed that gathering. Let's hope that the PHFI, the Public Health Foundation of India, can really set out a new path on this critical area for India in the future. Well, still ahead on Pace the Nation, the Rajya Sabha poll results are announced. More businessmen enter the upper house. Is politics now big business, or is big business really politics? This is the country's infotech capital. But are people from the industry now planning to move to Hyderabad?
I would say that puts the finger on most of the problems.
When they wanted to invest in India, they prefer Bangalore.
Infrastructure of Bangalore should be thought in terms of the ordinary people of Bangalore.
I would have liked to have seen a scientist. This is a city of scientists.
Watch the exclusive CNN IBN Deccan Herald, Radio City 4. In State of Bangalore, only on CNN IBN, 9:30 p.m. on Saturday, 12 noon on Sunday.
State of Bangalore, brought to you by Deccan Herald. Radio partner Radio City, City Mekhoja. And Microsoft, your potential.
IBN.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. Time now for our second lead tonight on the program. The results of the Rajya Sabha elections. India's upper house in 3 states were declared today. The list features both some expected results and some surprises. Neha Seth gives you a quick roundup.
The Uttar Pradesh Rajya Sabha elections were marked with heavy cross-voting despite the open ballot system. The winners were, in Uttar Pradesh, Balihari of the BSP, Murkad Ali BSP, Kalraj Mishra BJP, Vinay Katiyar BJP, Mehboob Madni RLD, Janeshwar Mishra SP, Banwari Lal Kanchal SP, Veerpal Singh SP, Mahendra Mohan SP, Virendra Bhatia SP. With 6 major contestants for 4 Rajya Sabha seats, Karnataka witnessed a keen contest. Winners at the end of the day were, in Karnataka, KB Shanappa of the BJP, Rajashekhar Murthy of the JDS, Rahman Khan of the Congress and Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Independent. In West Bengal, the fight was for 5 seats. The final winners were, in West Bengal, Moinul Hassan CPM, Tapan Sen CPM, Mukul Roy Forward Bloc, Barun Mukherjee Forward Bloc, Siman Pathak CPM. With Bureau Inputs, in New Delhi, Neha Seth.
Well, the big story of those elections, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, former head honcho of BPL, getting elected as an independent from Karnataka, and Sudhanshu Mittal, a Delhi-based businessman, also standing as an independent, losing out in Uttar Pradesh. But the trend of businessmen trying to get into the upper house of parliament keeps increasing. Remember, Vijay Mallya, Lalit Suri, among others, are members of the upper house. Also a member of the upper house, now re-elected for a second term, is Jai Panda, Biju Janata Dal MP from Orissa. He too is from a corporate family. Thanks very much, Jai Panda, for joining us. Let's have a look very closely at that equation between businessmen and politicians. Now, the feeling, Mr. Panda, is by and large, businessmen enter politics, or enter parliament in particular, because they need political patronage. Your take?
I think it's unfair to generalize. In my case, I've been politically active for many years. I was involved with the party, the BJD, right from its inception when Naveen Patnaik founded it. And please don't make the Rajya Sabha sound like some kind of a country club, because I've had to work very hard to represent my party and my state to ensure that Orissa has a voice.
Right. But are you then saying that corporate leaders, I know you don't want to make generalizations, but there's a feeling that corporate leaders use money power to enter the upper house, and the upper house, increasingly independent candidates in particular, enter the upper house largely on money power? I know you're not an independent, but you still need money power.
Well, first of all, since the amendments made to the People's Representation Act 2 years ago, the influence of money power in Rajya Sabha elections has reduced by something like 90%. There are very rare cases where somebody can bring in money and influence, which is now an open vote. But to answer your earlier question as to whether businessmen want to be in the Rajya Sabha for patronage reasons, I see only actually a sprinkling of businessmen in the Rajya Sabha. I see many of them making very useful contributions, but most importantly, anybody that wants political patronage probably doesn't want to be in the limelight in the Rajya Sabha. It's probably much easier to get patronage from outside the limelight of Parliament.
But we had an interesting case earlier this week where Anil Ambani chose to quit his Rajya Sabha seat. The feeling was that one of the reasons he did it was he didn't want to be identified too closely with one political party. Now, is that a hazard for businessmen, that when you enter politics, you're essentially aligning yourself with some political grouping?
Well, again, let's not generalize. There are some politicians who are independent, so obviously they are not aligning. There are some businessmen that get involved in a party and are politically active and have a political involvement separate from their business backgrounds. And so there are all kinds, so let's not generalize.
But are you saying that when questions are raised in Parliament, you don't look at your business interests? Isn't it true that businessmen are using Parliament to lobby for specific business interests? I'm not saying it's wrong to lobby. I'm not being moralistic at all. In fact, the fact is that perhaps you should legitimize lobbying, but since it's not legitimate, Parliament is used by businessmen to lobby for their specific interests.
Actually, you've raised a very important question, and I think I need to give you 2 answers which are important to this. Last year, the Ethics Committee of Parliament passed new rules by benchmarking the standards of disclosure and conflict of interest with that of many other democracies, including the US, the UK and Australia. And I think today we have a set of rules which are modern and up to date and require a great deal of disclosure. Anytime any member gets up to speak, he or she has to first disclose if he or she has an interest in that particular matter. But again, I would like to make a point that it is much easier for big business to influence and gain patronage by not themselves being in Parliament. I think it's easier for them to work behind the scenes. So those people from business backgrounds who do get into Parliament, I think really do have a sense of doing something for the country rather than seeking patronage.
Is it to do something for the country, or is it the scent of power? Businessmen have money. Now you want a touch of power. It's glamorous to be part of the power circle, isn't it? Come on, now be honest in your last answer.
Actually, if you take a look at the makeup of Parliament, I see only a handful of people of business background in the Rajya Sabha. I see many more lawyers. I see many more people from a trade union background. I see some journalists, by the way. And I don't think there is any particular reason to think that businessmen have a greater affinity for power than either lawyers or trade unionists or journalists.
Or even journalists. I think that's important that you mentioned journalists at the end of the road, but perhaps the upper house has become much more eclectic than it ever was. Jai Panda, thanks very much for joining us from Bhubaneswar. That's on a day when Rajiv Chandrasekhar of BPL now enters, ex-BPL, enters the upper house of the country. We'll take a short break. After that, on Face the Nation, our defining moment. That's coming up in just a moment.
टेक्नोलॉजी रखे किचन चकाचक और क्लीन करना सुपर आसान। फेवर साथ जिंदगी का।
Welcome back to Face the Nation. It's time now for our defining moment tonight. There was a toss-up today between Harbhajan Singh, who took 5 wickets to spin India to victory at the Firozshah Kotla in the first one-dayer, and Sonia Gandhi, who returned to Rai Bareli today after she had resigned, her first visit after she had resigned. We plumped for Sonia Gandhi because perhaps in this speech, Sonia Gandhi, the politician, has been revealed like never before. Aggressive, attacking. It's clear that Sonia Gandhi is here to stay in Indian politics, resignation or no resignation. Up ahead also at 10:30, Kapil Dev's sixer. So don't miss that in just a moment. But first, our defining moment, Sonia Gandhi in Rai Bareli. Good night, goodbye.